The first patient arrives at 2 in the morning. He is a firefighter. He is 23 years old. He walks through the door of medical unit 126 on his own feet, which will later seem remarkable given what you are about to find when you examine him. He walks in and he sits on the edge of the examination table, and he looks at you with the expression of a man who feels unwell and is not sure why. You ask him what happened. He says there was a fire at the plant. He says he was on the roof. He says he feels strange. You ask him to describe strange. He says, a taste, metallic, and his skin. He says his skin feels wrong, but he cannot say exactly how it feels wrong. You take his hand. His skin is warm in the way that skin is warm when it is beginning to react to something, not burned, not the specific heat of a thermal burn, something else. A warmth that comes from underneath. You have been a doctor for 4 years. You have treated burns. You have treated infections, fractures, cardiac events. You have treated the ordinary range of things that a young doctor in a Soviet provincial hospital treats. You have not treated this. By 3 in the morning, there are 12 more like him. By 4, there are 28. By morning, you know what you are seeing. By morning, you also know that you cannot say what you are seeing. Not to the patients, not to their families, not to anyone who asks. This is a story about knowing and not being able to say. Different from the scientist who knew the reactor's flaw and chose not to speak. Different from the KGB officer who managed the information as a professional practice. This is simpler and harder than either of those. This is a doctor in a hospital with patients in front of her who knows what is wrong with them and has been told not to say the word for what is wrong with them. The word is radiation. The patients have acute radiation syndrome. The firefighters who came to the hospital in the first hours of April 26th had been on the roof of reactor number 4. They had picked up pieces of graphite from the open reactor core with their bare hands. They had breathed the air above the open core. They had been in the most radioactive environment that a human being in 1986 had ever survived long enough to walk away from. And they walked into Medical Unit 126 in Pripyat on their own feet and told the doctor on duty that they felt strange. Her name was Valentina. She was 28 years old. She had graduated from medical school in Kiev 4 years earlier and had been assigned to the Pripyat hospital, which was considered a good posting. A young city, modern facilities. The plant's population was young and generally healthy, and the work was not usually dramatic. She had done her job carefully and quietly for 4 years, and she had not been prepared for this night. Nobody had prepared her for this night. Not in medical school, not in her residency, not in any training she had received. Acute radiation syndrome was in the textbooks, in a theoretical section, with clinical descriptions that now, standing in front of 28 patients who had it, seemed entirely inadequate. She knew what she was seeing. She was told not to say what she was seeing. In this story, you are Valentina. The hospital smells of floor polish and something you do not yet have a name for. The patients are in the beds. The families are in the corridor. And the word that explains everything is the word you are not permitted to use. In this story, you are the doctor. You know the diagnosis. The diagnosis is not authorized. You treat what you can treat, and you say what you are allowed to say, and you carry what you cannot say. Medical Unit 126 is a good hospital. You have thought this many times in the 4 years you have worked here. Good by Soviet provincial standards, which means well-equipped compared to rural hospitals, understaffed compared to the large city hospitals, but functional and clean and staffed by people who take their work seriously. The building is 10 years old, built when Pripyat was built, designed for the specific population it serves. Young, healthy, the occasional industrial injury from the plant, the usual range of childhood illnesses, the ordinary obstetric and cardiac and surgical cases of a working city. You have delivered babies here. This is what you think about sometimes in the weeks after April 26th. You have delivered babies in this building. The specific intimacy of that work, the specific trust that it requires, the fact that people brought the most vulnerable possible version of themselves to this building, and you were the person they found here. You think about this because it is the opposite of what happened on April 26th, when the building received people who had been made vulnerable by something outside themselves, and you were the person they found, and you could not give them what they came for. The night shift on April 25th to 26th is quiet until it is not. You are on duty. There are 3 of you. Yourself, a more senior physician named Dr. Belikon, who has been at the hospital for 15 years, and a nurse named Anya, who has the specific competence of a person who has seen everything a provincial Soviet hospital can produce and is no longer surprised by any of it. At 1:30, the phone rings. It is the plant emergency coordinator. He says there has been an incident at the plant. He says some workers are being sent to the hospital as a precaution. He says the incident is under control. He says nothing else. You prepare the examination room. You do not know what you are preparing for. The first thing you notice about the first patient is his eyes. He is looking at you with complete trust. This is the specific trust of a sick person who has found a doctor. The transfer of responsibility that happens when someone who cannot fix their own problem finds a person whose job is to fix problems. He trusts you completely. You are 28 years old and you have 4 years of experience, and you are looking at something you have never seen, and his trust is the largest thing in the room. The symptoms arrive in a sequence. First, the nausea. All of them have it. The specific nausea that begins at the back of the throat and settles in the stomach and does not respond to the antiemetics you give, because it is not the ordinary nausea of food poisoning or gastric upset. It is a nausea that is below the level of the digestive system, something the body is producing from a deeper place. Then the skin of the men who were on the roof, not burned, not the sharp-edged, clearly delineated burn of thermal exposure, something more diffuse, a redness that spreads, that is warm to the touch, that the patients describe as feeling like sunburn that is coming from the inside rather than the outside. Some of them have it on their faces and hands, the surfaces that were most exposed. Some have it more broadly than the other things, the metallic taste in the mouth, which almost all of them report, the headache that sits behind the eyes and does not respond to analgesics, the specific fatigue that arrives not gradually but suddenly, as if the body has made a decision about how much energy it has available and has revised the number downward without warning. You examine each patient. You record the findings. By 3 a.m, you have 20 patients, and by 4, you have 30, and the examination room is full, and the corridor has people in it, and Anya is moving between them with the focused efficiency of a nurse who has decided that efficiency is the most useful thing she can offer right now. Dr. Bellicon arrives at 4. He looks at the patients. He looks at you. He says, "What do you think?" You say the word, quietly, just to him. He is quiet for a moment. He says, "Yes." Then he says, "Document it as burns and general malaise. Do not use the other term in the records." You look at him. He looks back. He is not a cruel man. He is a man who has worked in Soviet medicine for 15 years and who understands what the institution requires. You pick up your pen. You write, "Burns, general malaise." The clinical picture of acute radiation syndrome is specific enough that you recognize it, even though you have never seen it. The sequence of symptoms, the specific quality of the nausea, the erythema, the redness of the skin. That is not a thermal burn, the metallic taste. All of these are in the textbooks, described precisely enough that a doctor who has read them carefully can identify what she is seeing. You read the textbooks carefully. You are the kind of person who reads carefully. You know exactly what this is. You write burns and general malaise. You put the pen down. You go to the next patient. The families start arriving before dawn. Wives mostly, some mothers, a few fathers. They come because the plant has called someone who called someone, and the word has moved through the community, the way words move through close communities, imprecisely and quickly. And now they are in the corridor of Medical Unit 1, 2-6, at 4 in the morning, in their coats pulled over their nightclothes, looking for the face of someone they know. They ask you things. They ask, "What happened?" They ask, "How serious is it?" They ask, "When can I see him?" They ask, "Is he going to be all right?" They ask the questions that people ask when someone they love is behind a door they cannot open. Questions that are requests for certainty in situations where certainty is not available. You have answers. You have answers that are accurate and answers that are authorized, and these are not the same answers. The accurate answer is, your husband has received a significant radiation dose. The symptoms he is experiencing are consistent with acute radiation syndrome. The severity depends on the dose, which we cannot yet accurately measure. Some patients with this presentation recover fully with supportive care. Others do not. The honest answer to whether he will be all right is that we do not know. The authorized answer is he has been affected by the incident at the plant. We are treating the symptoms. He is stable. We will let you know if anything changes. You give the authorized answer. You watch their faces receive it. They know the authorized answer is not the accurate answer. You can see this in their faces. They have looked at you long enough to understand the gap between what you are saying and what you are not saying, but they do not have the vocabulary to demand the accurate answer. And even if they did, you would not be able to give it to them here in this corridor at 4 in the morning, in this hospital, in this system. You move to the next family. You give the authorized answer. You watch the face receive it. You move on. A woman grabs your arm, not aggressively, the grab of someone who needs to stop the motion of a person who is moving away from them. She says, "Please, just tell me." She is perhaps 30. Her husband is one of the firefighters. She has been in the corridor for an hour. She says, "I can see it in your face. I know you know something. Please just tell me." You look at her. You look at her for long enough that the looking itself is a communication. The looking that says, I hear you, I understand, I know what you are asking. You say, he is being cared for. We are doing everything we can. She lets go of your arm. She goes back to the wall where she was standing. You go back to the examination room. The civil defense dosimetrists come at 5 in the morning. They bring their equipment and they measure the patients and they measure the hospital and they measure you and they write down numbers. The numbers go into their report. Their report goes to the Civil Defense Command. The Civil Defense Command sends the report to the party committee. The party committee does something with it that you are not told about. You ask one of the dosimetrists what the readings show. He looks at you. He says he is not authorized to share the measurements with hospital staff. You say, I am treating these patients. The measurements are clinically relevant. He says, I understand. I am not authorized. He goes back to his equipment. This is the specific architecture of Soviet information management. Applied to a medical situation, the person with the clinical need for the information and the person with the information are in the same building, and the information does not move between them because the system has decided on the route the information takes, and the route does not go through the treating physician. You treat without the numbers. You treat with what you can see and what you know and what your training gives you, without the specific quantification that the dosimeters would provide. You treat supportively, antiemetics, fluids, pain management, the clinical response to symptoms in the absence of a confirmed diagnosis that you are not permitted to confirm. The treatment you are providing is not wrong. It is insufficient. The treatment that the patients actually need is not available at Medical Unit 126. It requires specialized facilities in Moscow. It requires the specific expertise of physicians who have treated radiation injuries before, who know the protocols, who have the medications and the bone marrow support and the isolation capacity that acute radiation syndrome at this severity level requires. You know this. You call Kiev. Kiev says, we are aware of the situation. Arrangements are being made. The arrangements take most of the day. In the meantime, you treat with what you have. By mid-morning, the most severely affected patients are showing the second phase presentation. After the initial symptoms, acute radiation syndrome typically produces a period of apparent improvement. The body's acute stress response subsides. The nausea reduces. Some patients feel better and believe they are recovering. This is not recovery. This is the latent phase, the interval between the initial damage and the point at which the damage becomes fully expressed in the body's systems. The patients who feel better in this window are not better. The damage to their bone marrow and their immune systems is progressing invisibly. You know this. You watch them feel better, and you know what the feeling better means, and you do not say what it means. Dr. Belakon has been in this hospital for 15 years. He has seen things you have not seen, not radiation injuries. Nobody has seen radiation injuries like this, not here, not in this hospital. But he has seen the other difficult things, the industrial accidents at the plant in its early years, the farm equipment injuries from the surrounding villages, the specific range of ways that the human body can be damaged by the world, and the specific range of responses that medicine can offer. He does not speak much during this shift. This is unusual. You have worked with him for 4 years. And Dr. Balakan is a talker, not in a disruptive way, but a man who fills the working silence with observations and questions and the occasional dry remark about something he has read or seen. Tonight, he is quiet. He works. He examines patients. He writes orders. He speaks to families with the practiced gentleness of a physician who has been giving difficult information for 15 years. But between the patients, there is a silence that is new. You ask him once in the brief interval between two patients, what is going to happen to them? He says, some will be all right. You say, and the others? He looks at you for a moment. He says, the others will be transferred to Moscow. Moscow has better resources. This is not an answer to your question. He knows it is not an answer to your question. You do not ask again. There are more patients. You go, he goes. The silence between you holds what neither of you says. Late in the morning, a man comes to the hospital who is not a patient. He is from the party committee. He is in a suit. He speaks to Dr. Balakan in the office for perhaps 20 minutes. You are not in the office. When Dr. Balakan comes out, his face is the face of someone who has received instructions and is integrating the instructions into his operational picture. He finds you. He says, the patients are to be described in all documentation and all communications, with families as having chemical burns and cardiovascular stress from the incident. The word radiation is not to appear in any documentation. You say nothing. He says, this comes from above. You say, I understand. You go back to the ward. The word does not appear in any documentation you write for the rest of the shift. The ambulances come in the afternoon, not local ambulances. Specialized vehicles from Kiev, sent after the morning of calls and assessments and decisions made at levels above what you can see from inside the hospital. They come for the most severely affected patients, the ones whose symptom presentation and the visible severity of their skin involvement indicate the highest doses. You help prepare them for transfer. This involves the specific practical work of moving seriously ill patients from a hospital setting into transport vehicles, the IVs secured, the monitoring equipment arranged, the documentation prepared. The documentation that says burns and cardiovascular stress. You prepare it carefully. You write the words that are not the right words, and you prepare it carefully because the preparation is the only care you can give these patients in this moment, and the care matters even when the words do not. One of the patients, a young man, 22, who came in walking and talking at 2 a.m. and has since declined into the specific presentation of high-dose acute radiation syndrome, takes your hand when you come to prepare him for transfer. He says, "What is wrong with me?" This is the question you have been waiting for and dreading, the question that has been in the room all morning, unasked or asked and deflected, the question that every patient has in some form and that the authorized answers are designed to address without answering. He is 22 years old. He is looking at you. He went to the roof because the alarm went off and he was a firefighter, and that is what firefighters do. You say, you were exposed to something at the plant that has affected your body. You are being transferred to a hospital in Moscow that specializes in treating this kind of exposure. They have the equipment and the expertise that we do not have here. You are going to receive the best possible care. He looks at you. He says, "Am I going to die?" You say, "The doctors in Moscow will do everything possible." He nods. He lets go of your hand. The ambulance takes him. You do not know if the doctors in Moscow do everything possible. You do not know if everything possible is enough. You will find out later, through the accounts that circulate in the months after the accident, through the names in the reports that eventually become partially public. You find out that it is not enough for him. He dies in Moscow 2 weeks later. You go to the bathroom after the ambulances leave, not because you need to, because it is the one room in the hospital where you can be alone for a moment. You stand at the sink, you run the cold water, you put your hands under it, and you hold them there, and you look at your hands in the cold water, and you breathe. You have been breathing carefully all morning, the measured breathing of a person managing themselves through something by not allowing the management to lapse. You breathe, you count. The cold water runs over your hands. Then you dry your hands. You go back out. There are iodine tablets in the hospital, stable iodine tablets, which saturate the thyroid gland with non-radioactive iodine, so that if radioactive iodine is present in the environment, the thyroid cannot absorb it. This is a standard protective measure in radiation emergencies. One of the first things that should be distributed to the population when radioactive iodine is being released. The tablets are in the pharmacy. You know they are there. Dr. Belikon knows they are there. The Civil Defense Protocol for a nuclear emergency includes distributing iodine tablets to the surrounding population. Pripyat has 50,000 people. The release of radioactive material from reactor number 4 has been ongoing since the explosion. The tablets are not distributed, not because nobody knows they exist, not because the protocol does not call for it, because the distribution of iodine tablets to the population is a visible action that communicates a specific message, that the population is at risk from radioactive iodine, and the decision has been made at levels above the hospital that this message should not be communicated. The tablets sit in the pharmacy. 50,000 people walk through the radioactive air of Pripyat on the morning of April 26th, and the afternoon and the evening and the next morning, without the protection that the tablets would have provided, because the system has decided that the protection communicates a message that the system is not ready to communicate. You know the tablets are there. You treat the patients in front of you. You do not go to the street and hand out tablets. This is the thing you think about most afterward. Not the word you did not write in the records, not the answer you did not give to the families, the tablets in the pharmacy, the tablets that were there, the 50,000 people who did not receive them, because you did not go into the street and hand them out. You did not go into the street because that is not how the system works, because an individual doctor does not unilaterally override a system-level decision, because the consequences of that kind of unilateral action in a Soviet institution in 1986 are consequences you have been aware of your entire professional life. You treated the patients in front of you. The tablets stayed in the pharmacy. Years later, you read an account by a civil defense official who was in Pripyat that night. The official describes being told that iodine tablets should not be distributed because distribution would cause panic. He describes agreeing with this assessment. He describes the chain of reasoning. Panic causes harm. Distribution causes panic. Therefore, distribution causes harm. Therefore, no distribution. The logic holds at each individual step. The conclusion is wrong. You read it, and you think about the pharmacy. You think about 50,000 people. You are still at the hospital when the evacuation happens. You have been on shift for more than 30 hours. You have not slept. You have been replaced by the day shift in theory and have stayed because the situation does not respect shift changes, and because there are still patients in the building, and because leaving feels like abandonment of something you cannot name precisely, but that your body refuses to leave. Through the hospital windows, you watch the buses arrive, the buses for the evacuation of Pripyat, hundreds of them filling the main roads, the residents filing out of the apartment buildings with their bags and their children. From the hospital window, it looks orderly. It looks like a practiced emergency procedure, like something that has been drilled and is now being executed. It does not look like 50,000 people permanently leaving their homes. It looks like 3 days, because that is what they were told. 3 days. You stay at the hospital as the city empties around it. The hospital does not evacuate. There are still patients, and patients cannot simply be put on buses. The patients who were not transferred to Moscow are still in beds. A skeleton staff remains. You remain. The city goes quiet. First, the street noise reduces. The ordinary sound of 50,000 people going about their lives, thinning as the buses fill and leave. Then the buses stop, and the streets are empty, and the sound of the city is gone, replaced by a specific quiet that cities do not usually have, the quiet of a city-sized space, without the humans who make it a city. You stand at the window. You look at the empty street. You have lived in Pripyat for 4 years. You know this street. You know the bakery on the corner that opens at 7 and the smell of it in the mornings when you walk to work. You know the school across the road and the sounds it makes when the children are outside. You know the specific quality of this street at different times of day and different times of year. You do not recognize it now. It is the same street, and it is entirely different. In the hospital, one of the remaining patients calls for you. He is one of the less severely affected. His dose was lower than the men transferred to Moscow. His symptoms more manageable. He has been following the evacuation through the window of his room. He says, "My family." He says, "My wife and my daughter. They would have been on the buses." He says, "Where did the buses go?" You tell him. You tell him the name of the village. He nods. He says, "She packed for 3 days." You say, "Yes." He says, "She does not know." He means she does not know what is wrong with him, what the doctors have not been permitted to tell her. He is right. She does not know. The authorized answer does not tell her. You are evacuated from the hospital on April 28th. The remaining patients have been transferred or are stable enough to move. The skeleton staff is released. You are given a dosimeter reading, your personal accumulated dose from the 36 hours in the hospital. And the number is higher than you expected, and you put it in your pocket without saying anything about it. You go to Kiev. In Kiev, you stay with a colleague from medical school. She has seen the news, the authorized news, the news that says small accident, under control, precautionary evacuation. She asks you what it was really like. You say, difficult. She says, but it is under control. You say, they are working on it. This is not a lie. They are working on it. It is also not what she asked. In Kiev, you try to sleep. Sleep is not straightforward. The specific difficulty of sleep after a long shift in high-stress conditions is familiar to you, the body exhausted and the mind still running, still processing, still moving through the cases and the decisions and the faces. This is familiar. What is not familiar is the specific content of what the mind is processing. The faces of the patients, the faces of the families in the corridor, the woman who grabbed your arm, the 22-year-old who asked if he was going to die, the tablets in the pharmacy. You sleep eventually, not well, but eventually. In the morning, you call the hospital to ask about the remaining patients. You are told they have all been transferred or discharged. You ask about specific patients by name. You are given the authorized responses. You thank the person and you hang up. Later, through channels that are not authorized, but that exist anyway, through the medical community's own network of people who know things, you find out what happened to the patients you treated in the first hours. You find out slowly, over weeks and months, the names and the outcomes. Some of them are all right. Some of them are not all right. The distribution of who is all right and who is not correlates with what you saw in the first hours, the severity of the presentation, the degree of skin involvement, the speed of symptom onset. Your clinical assessment in the first hours, made without the dosimeter numbers you were not given, was accurate. Your diagnosis, the one you were not permitted to write, was correct. This gives you no comfort. Correct diagnosis, without the ability to act on the diagnosis, is not medicine, it is witnessing. There is a meeting months later of the medical staff who worked in the first hours of the Chernobyl response. Not an official meeting, an informal gathering organized through the same unofficial channels that the information about the patients traveled through. You sit in a room with 12 doctors and nurses who were in medical unit 126 and in the plant's own medical facility on the night of April 25th to 26th. You sit together, you talk about what you saw and what you were told to say and what you did not say and what the difference cost. The meeting lasts 3 hours. Nothing is recorded. Nothing is official. At the end, you go back to your separate lives and your separate practices, and you carry what you carry. The meeting was enough. It was something. Saying it to each other, even in that unofficial room, was saying it. You took an oath, not the Hippocratic oath exactly, the Soviet medical oath, which covers similar ground in different language, the commitment to relieve suffering, to do no harm, to apply your knowledge in the service of the patient, to maintain the trust that the patient places in the physician. You think about the oath now. You think about it in the context of what April 26th required of you, the authorized language in the records, the authorized answers in the corridor, the tablets in the pharmacy, the young man who asked if he was going to die and received an answer that was not a lie and was not the truth. The oath says, relieve suffering. You relieved what suffering you could relieve with what you had. The oath says, do no harm. You did not harm anyone directly. The harm that was done by what you did not do, by the space between the accurate diagnosis and the authorized documentation, by the tablets that stayed in the pharmacy. The oath says, maintain trust. The families in the corridor trusted you. They gave you the specific trust of people who have no one else to trust in that moment. And what you gave them in return was the authorized answer, carefully delivered which honored the surface of the trust without honoring its substance. You sat with this for a long time. You are still sitting with it. Not because you believe you should have behaved differently. This is the complicated part, the part that does not resolve cleanly. You are not certain that behaving differently was possible in any meaningful sense. Handing out tablets unilaterally would have resulted in consequences that would have ended your ability to treat anyone. Refusing to write the authorized language would have produced the same. The system within which you were operating defined what was possible, and you operated within the system. This is how it works. This is how it always works. The system defines the possible. The people inside the system operate within the possible, and what is not possible, what the system excludes from the possible, accumulates somewhere in the bodies of the patients, and in the memories of the doctors, and in the tablets that stayed in the pharmacy. You continue practicing medicine. This is important to say. After Chernobyl, after everything, you continue. You see patients every day. You diagnose and treat and counsel and refer. You deliver babies. You manage chronic conditions. You do the ordinary daily work of medicine. That is what medicine is most of the time. Not the extraordinary emergency, not the night when everything is wrong, but the steady accumulation of small, careful acts of care. You do this work, and you do it well, and you do not stop doing it. The night of April 26th is part of what you carry. It is not all of what you are. Years later, you teach, not about Chernobyl specifically, about emergency medicine, about how to respond in mass casualty situations, about triage and documentation, and the management of patients when the resources are insufficient for the need. You teach young doctors the things you learned and the things you wish you had known, and the things that the night of April 26th taught you that no textbook had. You teach them about the word, not in explicit terms, not as a lesson called, "This is what happened at Chernobyl, and this is the word they told us not to use," but in the way that a teacher who has been through something teaches it, through the cases you choose, through the questions you ask, through the specific emphasis you place on the importance of accurate diagnosis and accurate documentation, and the relationship between what a doctor knows and what a doctor says. The students do not always understand what you are teaching. That is all right. Some of them will understand it later, in the moment when they need to understand it, when they are standing in a corridor with a family who is asking them a question, and they have the accurate answer and the authorized answer, and they have to choose. You cannot make the choice for them. You can teach them that the choice exists, that it is a real choice with real consequences either way, that the oath they took is not abstract, that the patient in front of them is a person who came to them because they had nowhere else to go, that the trust in that person's eyes is the trust that medicine runs on, that what happens to that trust when it is not honored is something they will carry, that they will carry it the way you carry it, not as a punishment, as the weight of a thing that mattered, as the evidence that what they do matters, as the proof that medicine is not just technique. It is the decision again and again about what to say. Close your eyes. The first patient arrived at 2 a.m. He walked in on his own feet. You knew what was wrong. You treated everything you could treat. The tablets are still in the pharmacy. You still think about the tablets. A note of history. Medical Unit 126 in Pripyat was the first hospital to receive patients from the Chernobyl explosion. The initial patients were firefighters who had been on the roof of reactor number 4 in the hours after the explosion. They began arriving in the early hours of April 26, 1986, and the hospital received approximately 134 patients in the first hours of the accident, most of them plant workers and emergency responders. The medical staff at Medical Unit 126 correctly identified the clinical presentation of acute radiation syndrome, but were instructed to document the cases using alternative diagnoses. Medical records from the first hours of the accident describe patients as having burns and cardiovascular stress rather than radiation exposure. This reflected both the institutional pressure to minimize the apparent severity of the accident and the genuine uncertainty about the precise doses received. The most severely affected patients were transferred to Hospital Number 6 in Moscow, which specialized in radiation injuries. Of the 134 patients initially hospitalized, 28 died from acute radiation syndrome in the weeks following the accident. These 28 deaths are the direct confirmed deaths from the explosion in the acute phase. The long-term health effects on the hundreds of thousands of liquidators and on the population of the affected regions continue to be studied and remain a subject of scientific and political debate. Potassium iodide tablets, which protect the thyroid gland from radioactive iodine by saturating it with stable iodine, were available at medical facilities in Pripyat and the surrounding area at the time of the accident. The tablets were not distributed to the general population of Pripyat. Soviet authorities did not order distribution because they were concerned about causing panic. This decision resulted in significant thyroid radiation exposure for the population, particularly children, who are most vulnerable to radioactive iodine. The subsequent increase in thyroid cancer among children in the affected regions, which became apparent in the years after the accident, is the most clearly documented long-term health effect of the Chernobyl disaster. Dr. Angelina Guskova and Dr. Alexander Baranov at Hospital Number 6 in Moscow were the lead physicians treating the most severely affected patients. Their clinical records and accounts provide the most detailed documentation of the acute radiation syndrome cases from Chernobyl. Dr. Guskova had extensive prior experience treating radiation injuries from other nuclear incidents in the Soviet Union and was one of the most experienced radiation medicine specialists in the world. Her account of the Chernobyl patients is among the most important medical documents from the disaster. The Soviet Union did not acknowledge the Chernobyl accident publicly until April 28, 1986, more than 2 days after the explosion, and then only after Sweden had detected elevated radiation and gone public with its findings. The delay in public acknowledgement meant that the population of the affected regions received no protective guidance during the first 2 days of the accident. People went about their normal activities, including allowing children to play outside in areas where radioactive fallout was accumulating. Valentina is a fictional character, but the hospital, the patients, the institutional constraints on diagnosis and documentation, and the iodine tablets that were not distributed are all real. The experiences described in this story are drawn from the accounts of actual medical workers who were present at Medical Unit 126 and at Hospital Number 6 in the hours and days after the explosion. Their accounts were collected by journalists, historians, and researchers in the years after the accident, particularly after the Soviet Union's collapse, made such accounts possible to publish. Next, the stray dog